On Earth, the skies darkened, and an eerie, ominous energy started to spread across it. But the first thing Piccolo noticed wasn't the sky, or the portals, or the demons. It was the silence. One moment, Goku's presence had been there as it always was, steady, unmistakable, like a constant landmark in the back of his mind. And then it was simply gone. No fading, no movement, just absence. Piccolo froze mid-meditation, eyes snapping open as he reached out with his senses again, sharper this time, more desperate. Nothing. Vegeta's ki vanished almost simultaneously, that sharp, defiant edge snuffed out as if it had never existed. That's not possible, Piccolo muttered, rising to his feet, dread crawling up his spine. Goku didn't hide. Vegeta didn't disappear quietly. Whatever had happened to them wasn't natural. Within minutes, the world began to feel wrong. Small distortions crept into the air, barely noticeable at first, like heat ripples without heat, and Piccolo felt something unfamiliar brushing against his senses, thin, chaotic, not quite demonic, not quite divine. Chaos, energy, he growled softly, recognizing it from ancient texts rather than experience. And something else layered underneath. He didn't have time to investigate further before the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds stretching thin as if reality itself were being pulled apart, and the first rifts opened. They didn't explode open. They settled. From them stepped demons, not charging or screaming, but moving with lazy confidence, as if this world had already been judged and found wanting. Red demons stalked the streets, heavy footsteps cracking pavement beneath swollen muscles, while gray demons flickered across rooftops in sharp bursts of speed that bent perspective. Orange demons came last, unstable things that laughed too loudly and moved too erratically, their bodies flickering as if reality itself had not decided what rules they followed. Galen emerged through a wider portal moments later, stretching his arms and rolling his neck as he looked around at the city skyline with open disappointment. "Tisish, this doesn't look like Leoness," he said bluntly. "Or Britannia." Melascula slithered out beside him, her gaze drifting across buildings and fleeing humans with idle curiosity. "No sacred land. No divine pressure," she murmured. "How strange." Frodrin followed more cautiously, scanning the air itself rather than the city. "This world isn't sealed," he said quietly, "but the mana density is wrong." Galen shrugged. "Doesn't matter. If it's not Britannia, it's still fragile." He gestured lazily. "Let's see what lives here." The demons didn't attack immediately. They prowled, overturned vehicles, shattered windows, and laughed at the panic they caused, testing reactions rather than committing to slaughter. That hesitation was what set Piccolo fully on edge when he arrived, landing hard in the middle of a fractured street as his ki flared outward defensively. His senses brushed the battlefield and recoiled. "This energy," he muttered, brow furrowing. "It's demonic but layered. Structured." Gohan landed beside him moments later, aura flickering unevenly as if pushing through resistance. "Dad, my ki feels sluggish, like it's moving through thick air." Trunks dropped in next, sword already drawn, eyes narrowing. "Same. I can fight, but my control's off." Krillin and Tien joined moments later, both visibly uncomfortable. "Okay," Krillin said nervously. "First Goku and Vegeta vanish, now this? I really don't like magic worlds." Galen noticed them immediately and grinned wide, genuine delight lighting his face. "Ah," he said, pointing his axe toward them. "There you are. You're not human." Melascula tilted her head, studying Piccolo and Gohan closely. "Nor do you smell like gods," she added softly. "What are you?" Piccolo crossed his arms, eyes locked on Galen. "We're the ones protecting this planet," he replied. "You're tearing holes in it. Start explaining." Galen laughed. "Explaining's boring." He waved a hand lazily. "Go on," he told the demons. "Play with them." The red demons moved first, surging toward Piccolo and Gohan with blows heavier than their size suggested. Piccolo met one head-on, surprised by the raw strength, but countering instantly, snapping a limb and following with a controlled ki blast that sent the demon crashing, through his storefront. "They're strong," he said, "but not stronger than us." Gohan exchanged rapid blows with a gray demon whose speed forced him to rely on technique rather than power. "They're fast, but predictable." Trunks cut through another with a clean sword strike, landing lightly and frowning. "This should be easier." That was when Piccolo tried to sense deeper and froze. Galen's power, stripped of motion and intent, felt wrong, reading far lower than the force behind his blow suggested. "That can't be right," Piccolo muttered, blocking another axe swing that cratered the street. Gohan felt it too, focusing inward. "Dad, I can barely read them. If this were Ki, I'd say they're weaker than us." Trunks grimaced. "Yeah, the numbers don't match the damage." Frodern watched their reactions closely. "You rely on numerical perception," he observed calmly. "A dangerous limitation." The answer pressed in around them, thick and suffocating. Their Ki told them they should be winning decisively. Piccolo's strikes landed harder. Gohan moved faster. Trunks fought cleaner. But the battlefield itself was saturated with something else, something that didn't flare or spike but oozed constantly, pressing against the mind like polluted air. Krillin shuddered as a wave of Melascula's magic washed past him without striking directly. "I don't care what the power levels say," he muttered. "That stuff feels evil." Tien nodded grimly. "It's not power," he said. "It's influence." Galen stepped in at last, laughing as his axe clashed with Piccolo's guard. "You're stronger than you look," he said approvingly. "But you're thinking too much." The sigil of truth pulsed faintly on his chest, tightening the air just enough to make Piccolo's throat tense. "Lie to me," Galen added casually. Piccolo snarled as stone briefly crept up his forearm when instinctive defiance crossed his mind, ripping free with a burst of ki. "So it reacts to intent," he growled. Galen grinned wider. "Smart. I like smart prey." Melascula shifted tactics, no longer teasing, but weaving magic into the battlefield itself. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, whispers slipping into the edges of perception. Yamcha staggered first, breath hitching as the street seemed to tilt beneath him. "Okay, nope, this is bad." Krillin followed, hands shaking as doubt, not his own, crawled up his spine. Tien dropped to one knee, his third eye throbbing violently as the magic scraped directly against his discipline. Piccolo noticed immediately, not just the suffering but the pattern. Galen's power was loud and violent, Frodern's precise and adaptive, but Melascula's influence was everywhere, bending the fight without throwing a punch. "That's it," Piccolo growled, blasting Galen back just far enough to disengage. "She's the real threat." Gohan felt the same realization click into place as the magic surged harder, his aura flaring as he steadied himself. "Dad," he said quietly, glancing skyward between exchanges, unease tightening his chest. "Where are you? Something really bad is happening." Galen laughed as he rose from the rubble. "Huh, now it feels right," he roared, flattening a section of street with a wild swing. "Run, panic. This is how fights should be." Melascula glanced over her shoulder, smirking. "Careful, Galen. You'll break them too fast." Piccolo made the call. "We change targets," he said firmly. "We disrupt her magic." Gohan nodded and surged forward, deliberately drawing Melascula's attention as Piccolo intercepted her curse threads with focused blasts. "It's not like energy," Piccolo said through clenched teeth. "You don't break it, you interrupt it." Galen hated being ignored. "Hey," he bellowed, sigil flaring brighter as critical overfed on his irritation and his strength spiked wildly. "Fight me properly." Frodern adjusted instantly, understanding the shift. "They're prioritizing," he said calmly. "Logical." The battlefield fractured again as pride, magic, and strategy collided, and beneath it all the absence of two familiar powers loomed heavier than any enemy. Piccolo and Gohan pushed forward under mounting pressure, knowing exactly who needed to fall first, while Melascula smiled wider, delighted that they had finally understood the game she had been playing all along. And somewhere beyond the sky, where Goku and Vegeta had vanished, something waited, patient and hungry, as the rules of two worlds began to unravel. The battlefield did not explode all at once. It thickened. Ki and magic pressed harder against each other as the conflict dragged on, each exchange feeding the environment itself. Piccolo's focused blasts colliding with Galen's amplified swings. Gohan's Super Saiyan, two lightning slicing through Melascula's curse constructs only for new ones to reform moments later, and Trunks trading increasingly desperate blows with Fraudrin as both adapted in real time. The air began to hum, not from sound but from accumulation, as if Earth itself were struggling to process energies it was never meant to host. Piccolo felt at first a subtle shift beneath the chaos, his senses prickling. "This fight's doing something," he growled. "The longer we keep this up, the worse it gets." He was right. The demons reacted before anyone else noticed. A red demon locked in combat with Yamcha suddenly convulsed, its roar cutting off as black fractures spiderwebbed across its skin, muscles swelling and twisting as chaos energy bled into something colder, emptier. It lunged again, not at Yamcha, but at the nearest demon, tearing into it with savage disregard. "What the hell?" Yamcha shouted, barely rolling out of the way as the thing slammed into the street hard enough to crater it. Krillin blasted it back instinctively, eyes wide. "That wasn't one of theirs, right?" 10, already struggling under Melascula's lingering magic, felt the shift like a spike through his skull. "No," he said grimly. "Something's hijacking them." One by one it spread. Gray demons mid-dash warped violently. Orange demons screamed as their instability tipped over into full corruption, and soon the battlefield was flooded with chaos. Void beasts, feral and indiscriminate, attacking demons, Z-fighters, and even the commandments without hesitation. Galen snarled as one slammed into him, claws screeching against his armor. "Get off me!" He split it in half with a single swing, but more followed immediately, their numbers growing as the ambient energy thickened. Melascula's confidence faltered for the first time as she raised her hand to command them, and felt nothing answer. "No, no, that's not possible," she hissed, frustration and fascination mixing as another corrupted beast lunged at her from behind, forcing her to dodge instead of control. The chaos escalated exponentially. Every corrupted demon seemed to feed the environment further, every scream and collision widening invisible fractures in the air. Civilians who hadn't escaped yet began to convulse under the pressure, their fear and panic amplifying the phenomenon. And Piccolo felt a cold realization settle in. "The more conflict there is," he shouted to Gohan over the noise, "the more fuel this thing gets." Gohan nodded tightly, blasting a void beast away from Krillin, then glancing toward Yamcha, who was struggling to stay upright as two more closed in. "We're running out of time." Far above them, reality bent, not tearing like before, but opening slowly, deliberately. Two immense presences pressed against the veil, their arrival not sudden but inevitable, and everywhere beneath that forming rupture the corruption intensified. More demons warped instantly. Chaos energy spiked. The void beasts grew more aggressive, more numerous, swarming anything that moved. Galen felt it and laughed despite himself, exhilaration overriding unease. "Now, this is a fight," he roared, swinging wildly as critical overflared brighter, uncaring that the world itself was beginning to crack. Melascula was less amused, forced into defensive casting as the beasts harried her relentlessly, her magic unraveling faster than she could weave it. "This isn't my game anymore," she snarled. Yamcha didn't see the third beast coming. It hit him from behind with brutal force, slamming him through the remains of a building and leaving him motionless amid the rubble, his energy flickering dangerously low. "Yamcha!" Krillin screamed, rushing toward him only to be knocked aside by the shockwave of another collision, his own body hitting the pavement hard as his vision blurred. Tin dropped beside them moments later, blood trickling from his brow as he forced himself upright. "He's alive," he said through clenched teeth, but barely. Krillin's not much better. He turned back toward the battlefield, shaking but resolute. "I'm not done yet." Fraudrin watched it all with a calculating gaze as the rupture overhead widened further, void energy pouring down like pressure rather than light. He felt it calling to him, offering power, adaptation, survival. "So this is the cost," he murmured. "Very well." He stepped forward and drew the energy in deliberately, his body swelling slightly as corruption threaded through his vessel, power surging at the expense of stability. Cracks spread across his form, his voice distorting as he gritted his teeth. "I can hold this for now." Piccolo sensed it instantly and grimaced. "He's absorbing it," he growled, "and it's killing him." Above them, the rupture finally crossed a threshold. As the air split wider, the corruption spiked violently, demons and nearby humans alike convulsing as more void beasts tore free, their numbers surging with every second the portal remained open. And through that widening tier, the presence of the Triarchs pressed closer, their attention fully captured at last by the collision of ki, magic, chaos, and fear below. The battlefield trembled as if bracing itself. This was no longer just a fight. It was a summoning. Back in Britannia, that single expression of abyssal felt like a sickness choosing a host. The light didn't dim like nightfall. It spoiled, as if the color had been leached out and left behind something stale. The air turned heavy in a way Goku recognized from deep space and collapsing pressure fields. Except this wasn't physics. This was presence. The mana around them, normally alive and responsive, recoiled like an animal smelling fire. Then the smell hit. Faint at first, almost imagined, like wet stone left too long in darkness, like iron in stagnant water. Merlin's eyes widened a fraction as her staff trembled in her grip. Not fear. Confirmation. This wasn't demonic. This wasn't chaos. It was something that didn't belong in any of their categories, something that had never needed permission to exist. Abyssal didn't power up. He didn't flare an aura or announce himself like a warrior. He simply arrived more fully, as if the world had finally finished noticing him, and the clearing answered with silence. The wind died mid-breath. Birds fell quiet so abruptly it sounded like they'd been erased. Even the crackle of Goku's Super Saiyan 3 aura seemed muffled for a heartbeat, like the void had leaned close to listen. Ban's grin vanished. "That," he muttered, jaw tightening, "ain't normal." Melioda's expression darkened in a way it only did when old nightmares resurfaced. "It feels like he started and stopped." There wasn't a clean word for it. Merlin's voice cut through them, low and sharp. "Do not treat him like a demon. Do not treat him like chaos. If you assume the wrong rules," her gaze flicked to the grass bending beneath invisible pressure, "you will die before you understand why." The ground began to fail without sound. Not shattering, not erupting, compressing, folding inward as if Britannia's laws had been rewritten in neat, cruel lines. Cracks spread in clean geometric patterns, and wherever those fractures touched, the grass browned instantly, not burned, rotted, as if time itself had been poisoned. A shallow dip opened beneath Melioda's boots, and he had to spring back as the earth dropped away like a trapdoor. Goku hovered above it, refusing to yield even an inch. He could feel the drain gnawing at him already. SSJ-3 biting into him faster than it ever should, as if the magic-saturated air were scraping the edges of his ki every second he held it. He forced his breathing steady anyway. The world could resist. He wouldn't flinch. "So that's your trick," Goku said, voice calm, eyes locked on Abyssal. "You're not trying to overpower me. You're trying to make the world do it for you." Abyssal's head tilted slightly, as if amused by how close Goku already was to the truth. His voice came distorted, layered, like it echoed from the cracks in the earth rather than his mouth. "I do not need tricks," he said. "Only inevitability." For a moment, nothing moved. A standoff held in the clearing like a held breath. The sins tense behind Goku, Merlin's mind racing, Diane and King bracing to defend a battlefield that was no longer stable. Then, without warning, the land beneath Abyssal collapsed. Not beneath his weight, but beneath his will. folding inward in a slow, silent spiral that should have dragged him down. It didn't. He hovered in place as if gravity had forgotten he existed. And that was when Goku understood. This wasn't a fighter stepping onto a battlefield. This was a void-shaped law entering Britannia. Goku moved first. He vanished with a crack of displaced air. SSJ 3 speed detonating the space where he'd been, reappearing right in Abyssial's face with a straight punch meant to end the question immediately. No theatrics, no blast, just a clean, brutal test. Abyssial raised one hand at the last instant, not blocking but angling, and Goku's fist missed by an inch. Yet the redirected force carved a trench across the horizon behind them like the world itself had taken the hit. Goku's eyes narrowed, stance shifting instantly, already adapting. "Okay," he muttered. "So you don't dodge. You redirect." Abyssial smiled wider. And the clearing in Britannia finally understood it had become a weapon. The clearing remained unnaturally still after Abyssial's words, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would break first. Goku hovered just above the ground, Super Saiyan 3 raging around him like a living storm. Yet even that immense power felt constrained, dragged down by the mana-heavy air that clung to his aura and leached strength with every breath. He could feel it clearly now. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was resistance, the land itself rejecting how violently his ki existed within it. His jaw tightened, eyes locked on Abyssial, every instinct screaming that this was not a fight that could be prolonged. Meliodas shifted his stance beside him, demon mark faint but present, blade angled low as he measured Abyssial's movements. He didn't rush in. That alone spoke volumes. Ban rolled his shoulders, grin thinner now, eyes darting between the spreading corruption and the way Abyssial's presence bent distance subtly, as if standing too close to him meant stepping into something that didn't fully exist in this reality. Merlin said nothing. Her staff hummed quietly, defensive spells already layered around the area, not to attack, but to contain. She could feel the ley lines straining, Britannia's magical foundation reacting like a body rejecting a foreign organ. This wasn't an invasion in the traditional sense, it was contamination. Abyssial took another step forward. The ground didn't just crack, it sagged inward, like the earth had grown tired of holding its own shape. Wherever his shadow passed, color drained, not darkening, but simplifying, as if the world was being reduced to something more primitive, more vulnerable. "You persist," Abyssial said calmly, his voice distorted yet precise. "You resist entropy with instinct and emotion. It is inefficient." Goku exhaled slowly, forcing his aura to compress again, sweat rolling down his temple despite the power roaring through him. "Yeah, maybe," he replied evenly, "but inefficient doesn't mean wrong." Abyssial regarded him for a long moment. Then, almost thoughtfully, "You are not meant to be here, and yet you adapt." That was when Hawk finally spoke. "Okay." Everyone stiffened, not because of the word, but because of how small it sounded in the silence. Hawk stood several yards back, frozen in place, staring at Abyssial with eyes so wide they looked permanently stuck that way. His voice trembled, but he didn't hide or scream this time. "I waited," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I really waited to see if this was just another scary thing that talks big." He swallowed. "It's not." Ben glanced back at him. "You good, buddy?" Hawk shook his head slowly. "No, but that thing." He pointed with one hoof, very carefully, as if afraid the gesture itself might draw attention. "That thing doesn't feel like it wants to fight. It feels like it wants to erase what it's standing on." The air pulsed again, stronger than before. Merlin's eyes narrowed. Hawk is right. Even without knowledge, he senses the intent. Goku felt it too. A tightening, a sense of inevitability creeping in beneath the clash of power. This wasn't a villain testing strength. This was a presence measuring how much resistance was worth acknowledging. Abyssial's gaze shifted, finally resting on Hawk for just a fraction of a second. Not hostile, not amused, simply aware. And that, more than anything, made Hawk's legs start shaking. "Yeah," Hawk whispered. "I don't like being noticed." The void around Abyssial deepened, the pressure rising another notch, and in that moment everyone understood the same terrifying truth. This wasn't the beginning of the real fight. This was the moment before Abyssial decided how seriously to take them. The pressure snapped violently as Abyssial's next strike came down, a void-laced blow aimed not at Goku, but at Ban, whose regeneration had already been taxed by the warped field. And for the first time, Ban felt it. The hit didn't just tear him apart, it unrode him for a split second, his body stuttering, as if unsure it was allowed to come back. Meliodas shouting his name as Ban hit the ground in pieces and didn't immediately move, the sight punching straight through Goku's chest as his breath caught and his aura faltered for half a heartbeat. Ban, that hesitation nearly killed him. Abyssial turned smoothly, capitalizing on the opening, void folding inward around his arm as he prepared to drive it straight through Goku's core, the ground screaming as gravity inverted for an instant. Big bang! Attack! The blast tore through the sky like a newborn sun. Blue-white ki slammed into Abyssial's side with catastrophic force, detonating outward and ripping a canyon through the clearing. The shockwave flattening what little remained standing and hurling everyone back as the void buckled violently around the impact point. Abyssial skidding for the first time, boots carving trenches as he was forced several dozen meters away. Silence followed. Then a familiar, furious voice cut through it. "Move, Kakarot. You're in the way." Goku's eyes went wide. He turned so fast his neck almost snapped. Vegeta. Vegeta hovered above the cracked earth, arms crossed, aura burning tight and controlled around him. Armor scuffed, blood dried at the corner of his mouth, eyes blazing with equal parts irritation and relief. "You look terrible," he added flatly. "What kind of idiot lets a place like this push him around?" Goku laughed, an honest, breathless laugh that shook loose some of the tension crushing his chest. "Man, I really thought you weren't here." He exhaled hard, shoulders dropping just a little. Good timing. Ban's body suddenly lurched. Flesh snapped back into place with a wet sound as he inhaled sharply and sat up, coughing. "Wow," he rasped. "That one almost stuck." He looked between Goku and Vegeta, grinning crookedly. "You guys always show up late." Goku blinked. "Wait, you're okay." Ban waved a hand. "Define okay." Vegeta snorted. "TCH annoying." But the tension in his stance eased just enough to betray that he'd noticed. Meliodas stepped closer, eyes narrowed but curious now as he studied the newcomer. "All right," he said, blade lowering slightly. "I'm guessing you're not with him." Vegeta shot him a sideways glance. "If I were, you'd already be dead." Merlin's eyes gleamed with sharp interest as she took in Vegeta's aura. "Another anomaly," she murmured. "No, the same origin as Goku's. A second variable." Abyssial straightened slowly, void seething where the Big Bang attack had struck, his attention fully locked onto Vegeta now, head tilting with unmistakable focus. "Another," he said softly. "More defiance." Vegeta smirked, cracking his neck. "Good. I was worried you'd be boring." The air twisted again. From a ruptured seam behind Abyssial, corruption poured outward as Razor emerged fully, his presence feral and violent. Void energy crawling over his frame like living scars, his arrival causing the land itself to recoil. Goku felt his stomach drop. "That's not the same one as before," he muttered. Vegeta's eyes narrowed. "So that's the other problem." Razor growled low, sound vibrating through bone rather than air, gaze flicking between Goku and Vegeta with predatory recognition before settling on Abyssial, their shared corruption resonating violently. The pressure doubled, and then the sunlight intensified. A massive, overwhelming presence surged in from the horizon, the oppressive void momentarily pushed back by sheer, incandescent dominance as a scanner arrived, boots striking the ground with the force of a falling star, axe materializing in his grip as his power crested under the nearing peak of the sun. He looked at Abyssial, then Razor, then at the shattered land around them. "I leave for one afternoon," a scanner said calmly, "and something dares to stain my world." Vegeta scoffed. "Great. Another loud one." Escaner's gaze slid to him, slow and disdainful. You glow loudly for someone who isn't the sun. Vegeta's aura flared in response. Say that again. Goku laughed despite himself, wiping blood from his chin as his SSJ-3 aura surged higher. More focused now, reinforced by familiarity and shared battle instinct. Guys, let's argue after we survive. Abyssial raised one hand. Razor mirrored him instinctively. The void howled. Goku's power exploded outward, Earth trembling violently as SSJ-3 pushed harder than before, his roar tearing through the sky as he launched forward, Vegeta flashing in beside him in a burst of blue-white ki. Escaner charging from the opposite flank with the sun blazing at his back, Meliodas and Ban rejoining the fray with renewed ferocity. The clash that followed wasn't just an explosion, it was a catastrophe. Ki and magic collided in layered shockwaves, mountains cracking in the distance, the sky itself rippling under the strain as Goku's full-force blows slammed into Abyssial. Vegeta's precision strikes detonated along Razor's guard. Escaner's sun-charged axe cleaved through void constructs, and Meliodas carved openings with ruthless efficiency. For the first time, Abyssial was forced to defend. For the first time, Razor was driven back. And for the first time since arriving in this broken convergence of worlds, Goku smiled, not with excitement, but with resolve. All right, he said between blows. Now it feels like a team. Abyssial's raised hand became the axis of the battlefield. The void threads between him and Razor tightened violently, pulling inward like muscles reconnecting, and that was when Goku moved first. He vanished, not a blur, an outright absence, and reappeared directly in front of Abyssial. SSJ-3 aura screaming as he drove a straight punch into Abyssial's chest with everything he could safely compress. The impact landed. Space folded inward with a concussive boom, the ground beneath Abyssial collapsing several meters as his body was driven back a step for the first time since the synchronization began. Got you, Goku shouted, teeth clenched. Abyssial slid backward, boots carving furrows through the stone, but he did not fall. Instead, he caught Goku's wrist mid-follow-up. Not with strength, with negation. The void crawled up Goku's arm like ice water, disrupting the flow of ki through his shoulder. Goku hissed in pain as his aura flickered violently. SSJ-3 stuttering for half a second. Your output exceeds your structural tolerance, Abyssial said calmly. Vegeta struck before Abyssial could finish the thought. He came in from Goku's blind side, shoulder first, slamming into Abyssial's ribs with a precision impact that detonated inside the void layer rather than against it. The internal blast ruptured Abyssial's balance, forcing him to release Goku as Vegeta followed up with a knee to the sternum that sent Abyssial skidding sideways across the battlefield. That's for touching him, Vegeta snarled. Abyssial recovered mid-slide, twisting unnaturally as he planted one hand into the ground to stop himself. And that moment of contact was all Escaner needed. Divine Axe, Rita. Escaner came down like the sun itself, axe blazing white-hot as it slammed into Abyssial's exposed shoulder. The strike connected fully, cleaving through void plating and carving a molten trench through the earth as Abyssial was driven hard into the ground, the impact shaking Britannia's horizon. For a split second, silence. Then the void exploded outward. Razor roared, synchronization snapping into aggression as he lunged directly at Escaner, claws tearing through the air. Escaner raised his axe to block, but the impact still hurled him backward, boots skidding as the sunlight around him flared violently to compensate. Vegeta intercepted again, this time taking the hit meant for Escaner, throwing himself into Razor's path and driving a big bang, charge palm into Razor's torso. The blast detonated point blank, sending Razor crashing through a ridge and burying him in rubble. Stay down, Vegeta barked. Ban chose that exact moment to do something reckless. He dove straight into the void surge around Abyssial. letting his body be torn apart mid-motion just to get close enough to grab Abyssial's cloak and wrench him sideways, breaking the alignment between him and Razor for a critical second. "Hey!" Ban shouted as half his torso disintegrated. "Eyes on me!" Abyssial struck back instantly, a void-laced backhand that hit Ban cleanly, erasing him down to bones and shadow, and sending what remained flying across the battlefield. Ban hit the ground in pieces. Did not move. Goku's breath caught again. Ban! But Ban's regeneration kicked in moments later, flesh snapping back into place violently as he coughed and laughed hoarsely. "Okay, don't recommend that." That second was enough. Merlin slammed her staff into the ground, releasing a localized containment lattice around Abyssial's feet. Not a prison, but an anchor. The void buckled as Abyssial's movement stalled just long enough for Goku to act. Goku roared, forcing SSJ-3 higher despite the pain, aura tearing chunks out of the ground as he gathered ki into both fists. "This ends a merge," he shouted. He struck, twice, a left hook to Abyssial's head followed by a downward hammer blow that drove him deep into the containment field, collapsing it entirely and throwing up a pillar of debris visible for miles. Abyssial was buried. Razor erupted from the rubble opposite them at the same time, fury overriding coordination as he charged blindly, only to meet Escanor head-on. Escanor did not dodge. He caught Razor's claws in one hand, muscles swelling, sunlight blinding as he forced Razor to a halt mid-charge. "You are not worthy of standing under my sun," Escanor said coldly. He drove his knee into Razor's chest. The impact shattered the ridge behind them and sent Razor flying. For the first time, both Triarchs were down, not defeated, but stopped. Goku hovered, breathing hard, SSJ-3 flickering dangerously as sweat streamed down his face. Vegeta landed beside him, chest heaving, eyes locked on the debris piles where Abyssial and Razor lay buried. "They'll get back up," Goku said quietly. Vegeta smirked, wiping blood from his lip. "Good," because deep beneath the rubble, the void was already stitching itself back together. Slower now, angrier, more deliberate. And everyone on that battlefield felt the same thing at once. This fight had crossed the point of no return. The sun did not simply shine brighter. It asserted itself. Escanor stood unmoving as the light locked into place above Britannia, his body swelling with absolute authority as the one emerged fully, not with rage, not with haste, but with inevitability. The ground bowed beneath his feet, stones spider-webbing outward in silent submission. Shadows fled instinctively, and even the void recoiled, its corruption curling inward as if scorched by something it could not digest. Every combatant felt it. Merlin froze, breath caught in her throat. "The one," she whispered, "at full apex." Diane staggered, bracing herself. "I can't even breathe, right?" King swallowed hard, wings tightening. "That pressure, it's not hostile. It's final." Goku felt his Super Saiyan 3 aura waver under the weight of it, teeth gritting as he forced himself upright. Whoa, that's not just power. That's dominance. Vegeta didn't look away. His fist clenched slowly. So that's what happens when pride wins. Across the battlefield, the Triarchs did not react with panic. They observed. Abyssial's fractured gaze tracked Escanor with focused interest, void currents tightening rather than surging. Razor's presence stirred beside him, hunger sharpening, but still restrained. The corruption did not lash out. It recalculated. Tension thickened until even the air seemed afraid to move. Reality split again, not violently but deliberately. Two immense figures were dropped onto the battlefield like living weapons, the impact of their arrival detonating outward in familiar demonic pressure. Chandler and Cusack stood where they landed, auras flaring, and then stabilizing into something wrong. Melioda's breath hitched. "Master!" "Chandler." Cusack turned his head slightly. There was no recognition. His eyes were empty. They moved instantly, not as mentors, not as guardians, but as instruments. Cusack vanished and reappeared among the sins, his strike detonating against Diane's defenses and sending her skidding despite her grip on the earth. Chandler followed with a void-twisted inferno that consumed King's barriers mid-formation, forcing Gowther to step in as spells unraveled the moment they touched the flames. "They're not focusing on one target," King shouted. "They're attacking everything." Merlin grimaced, staff vibrating violently. "They're stalling us, bleeding the battlefield. Every second they buy." The sky fractured further. Portals opened across the horizon. Zeldris and Esterasa arrived with the rest of the commandments in a flash of dark energy, sword half drawn as his eyes snapped to the chaos. Esterasa followed moments later, confusion twisting into fury the instant he recognized the figures tearing through the field. "Chandler," Esterasa demanded. "Cusack, what is this madness?" Cusack answered with a strike. Zeldris barely blocked, boots carving trenches as he skidded back, arm going numb. His eyes widened, not in fear but understanding. "They're not holding back." Meliodas stepped forward, blade raised, voice tight. "They're not themselves." Gowther's eyes glowed brighter as calculations raced. "Their wills are suppressed. Their abilities remain intact. They're being used." Esterasa's fists trembled. "Then we stop them." His voice cracked but hardened. "Even if they don't come back." Zeldris nodded once. "We fight." The commandments moved, not in obedience but defiance. Zeldris stepped forward first, dark aura snapping violently around him as he planted himself between Cusack and the Sins, sword half drawn but trembling in his grip. "Stop," he commanded, voice sharp but cracking beneath the strain. "This ends now. You're not weapons. You're not tools." His eyes searched Cusack's face desperately, looking for anything familiar. "You taught me to stand, to rule, to endure. Look at me." Cusack did not answer. His gaze passed through Zeldris as if he were empty space, and then he struck. Zeldris barely raised his blade in time, the impact detonating outward and throwing him back across shattered earth. He slid to a knee, coughing, disbelief written across his face. "TC, so that's how it is," he muttered. "You can hear me, and you still won't stop." Esterasa appeared beside him in a blur, fury boiling over as he caught Chandler's next attack head-on, the clash ripping a shockwave through the battlefield. "Enough!" Esterasa roared, teeth bared. "You don't get to look at us like that. You don't get to forget us." He shoved Chandler back with brute force, breath ragged, eyes wild. "Say something. Insult me. Do anything." Chandler's response was a void-infused incantation that twisted midair, detonating around Esterasa and driving him into the ground. Esterasa laughed hoarsely as he pushed himself up, blood streaking down his face. "So that's it," he spat. "You're already gone." Meliodas stepped in then, blade drawn, voice low and dangerous. "Zeldris, Esterasa, they're not your masters anymore." His eyes flicked to Chandler and Cusack, pain flashing briefly beneath his resolve. "They're being worn like armor." Gowther's voice cut through the chaos, calm but heavy. "Their emotional centers are suppressed. Only combat instincts remain. Any hesitation will be punished." He turned slightly toward the commandments. "If you intend to stop them, you must accept the cost." Gloxinia descended sharply, wings flaring as he landed beside Droll, eyes burning with resolve. "We didn't follow them out of fear," he said quietly. "We followed because we believed." His spear angled forward. "If belief ends here, then so do they." Droll grunted, rolling his shoulders as earth surged beneath his feet. "We buy time," he said simply. "For everyone." Across the battlefield, Goku watched it all unfold. Chest tight, Super Saiyan 3 aura crackling unevenly around him as he clenched his fists. "They're fighting their own teachers," he said quietly, disbelief mixing with something heavier. He glanced at Meliodas. "Is this normal around here?" Meliodas didn't smile. "No," he replied, "but it happens when gods lose control." Goku swallowed and stepped forward a half-step, calling out without realizing it. "Hey!" His voice echoed, cutting through the noise. "You don't have to do this alone. We can." He stopped himself as Cusack turned toward him, void energy sharpening instantly. Goku stiffened, instincts flaring. Okay, yeah, that look means talking's not gonna work. Vegeta snorted from behind him. You're slow, Kakarot. His eyes were locked on the commandments. But they got guts. I'll give them that. Zeldris wiped blood from his mouth and stood again, eyes hard now. You hear that? He shouted at Cusack, voice steady despite everything. Even outsiders can see what you've become. He raised his blade fully. If stopping you is what it takes to end this, then I'll do it myself. Esterasa cracked his neck, grinned crooked and furious. Guess this is the part where we disappoint our teachers. Cusack and Chandler moved again, void roaring around them as they surged forward with lethal intent. And for the first time since the battle began, the commandments charged not to conquer, not to serve, but to put an end to what they once revered, even if it meant dying to do it. The battlefield tightened, not with noise, but with inevitability. Droll moved first, planting himself between Chandler and the cluster forming around Merlin, his massive frame anchoring the ground as Diane, King, Gowther, and Hawk closed ranks around her. You think too much, Droll rumbled without looking back. Thinking won't stop what's coming. Time will. The earth answered him, rising in layered bulwarks as he drove Chandler back with crushing blows, every strike shaking the land harder than the last. Gloxinia swept overhead, wings blazing as he rained spirit blades down in precise arcs, each one forcing Cusack to redirect, to defend, to hesitate. You always told us strength was obedience, Gloxinia called out bitterly. Looks like you were wrong. His attacks intensified, faster, sharper, deliberately reckless as he pushed himself beyond caution. Greyroad lingered at the edge of the chaos, chanting frantically as she tried to bend the void beasts swarming closer, her magic unraveling the moment it touched them. This isn't right, she shrieked, fear finally breaking through her usual indifference. They don't listen. Nothing listens. That was when the void answered. Cusack pivoted mid-exchange, ignoring Zeldris entirely as he struck upward with brutal precision. The blow caught Gloxinia squarely, void tearing through his wings before slamming him down into the earth with catastrophic force. The forest floor shattered. Gloxinia didn't scream. He only gasped once, faintly, before going still, spirit light flickering out like a dying star. Droll felt it. He roared, raw and furious, abandoning defense as he charged Chandler with everything he had left. The collision cracked the battlefield in half, but Chandler didn't fall. Void crept up Droll's arms, eating through stone and flesh alike as Chandler drove a final blow straight through his chest. Droll staggered, looked once toward the others, and nodded. Then he fell. Greyroad tried to flee. The void closed around her like a mouth. Her screams cut off abruptly, leaving only a warped echo that faded into nothing. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Zeldris stood frozen, knuckles white around his blade. Esterasa's grin vanished completely, replaced by a hollow stare. Even Galen, somewhere distant amid the chaos, went silent. Goku felt the loss hit like a weight on his chest. They didn't hesitate, he said quietly. They knew. Meliodas lowered his sword just a fraction, jaw clenched. Yeah, they chose. Near the center of it all, Merlin hadn't moved once. Her eyes glowed faintly as sigils spun around her, calculations stacking faster than anyone else could follow. 3 sacrifices, she murmured. Enough mass, enough resistance, enough time. Her voice sharpened with urgency. They weren't trying to win. They were buying me seconds. Diane slammed her hammer into the ground, reinforcing the earth barrier around Merlin as another shockwave rolled through. Then you better use them, she shouted. King hovered low, wings spread wide, every ounce of his power focused outward. Anything that gets close dies, he said grimly. Gowther stood unervingly still beside Merlin, eyes glowing brighter as he monitored the battlefield. Probability of further losses remains high, he said flatly. However, convergence rate is slowing. Hawk peeked out from behind Diane's leg, eyes wide. Guys, he squeaked. I really don't like being right now. Merlin's grip tightened around her staff as she finally looked up, gaze locking onto the fused corruption forming at the heart of the chaos. You shouldn't, she said quietly, because if I'm right, this is the last moment before everything breaks. Around them, the void thickened, the Triarch presence pressing closer, fed by death, conflict, and collapsing worlds. And the battlefield braced itself for what came next. The air screamed, not with sound, but with pressure, a low, crushing sensation that made bones vibrate and teeth ache as the void reacted violently to the deaths it had just consumed. The ground convulsed in waves, fissures tearing outward from the center of the battlefield as the Triarch presence swelled, no longer content to observe. Goku staggered half a step, Super Saiyan 3 aura flaring unevenly as he forced himself to stay upright. He looked around at the destruction, the fallen commandments, the warped land, the way the sky itself seemed to be pulling apart, and for the first time since arriving, his voice wasn't excited or curious. It was tight. Meliodas, he said, lowering his fist slightly, eyes never leaving the center of the chaos. This is bad, right? Like end of the world bad. Meliodas didn't answer immediately. His grip tightened around his sword, knuckles whitening as he stared at the void-churned horizon. Yeah, he said finally, this isn't a demon problem anymore. This is something that eats worlds when they fight back. Vegeta stood rigid beside Goku, arms crossed but shoulders tense, eyes sharp with calculation rather than rage. He'd seen battlefields collapse before, planets, civilizations, but this felt different. They're feeding it, he growled. Every death, every clash. It's not just growing stronger, it's stabilizing. His gaze flicked toward Merlin. You're running numbers. Tell me you have a plan. Merlin didn't look at him yet. Sigil spun faster around her staff, glowing brighter as she layered spell upon spell, her expression taut with focus. I'm trying to stop the rules from rewriting themselves, she said calmly, though sweat had begun to bead at her temple. The void isn't just invading. It's synchronizing with this reality. Hawk, peeking out from behind Diane's leg, was very much not calm. SS synchronizing, he squeaked. That sounds like a word you use right before everything explodes. He looked up at Merlin desperately. Hey, fancy lady, please tell me there's a button we can push or something. Diane tightened her grip on Gideon, planting herself more firmly in front of Merlin. Just tell us what to hit, she said. We'll hit it. Hard. King hovered lower, wings buzzing anxiously. The corruption's spreading faster now, he warned. Even my barriers are decaying. Galver tilted his head, eyes glowing faintly as he processed outcomes. The deaths of Droll, Gloxinia, and Grey Road accelerated convergence, he said evenly. But they also reduced the number of controlling variables. The system is becoming simpler. Goku blinked. Is that good? Galver met his gaze. It means the enemy is preparing to commit. As if summoned by the words, the pressure deepened again, heavier, more deliberate. The void twisted inward at the center of the battlefield, darkness folding over itself like muscle tightening before a strike. Vegeta's jaw clenched. So what now? Merlin finally looked up, eyes reflecting fractured skies and crawling corruption. Now, she said quietly, we're out of time. She raised her staff slightly, the runes around it shifting into a new, unfamiliar configuration. The Triarchs are about to act directly. When they do, restraint will no longer be an option. Hawk gulped. That's not comforting. Goku rolled his shoulders, forcing a breath through the strain pressing down on him, his grin returning just enough to steady himself. Thinner, but real. Okay, he said. Then let's make sure whatever happens next happens on our terms. Vegeta smirked faintly, eyes burning with resolve. Just don't get in my way, Kakarot. Across the battlefield, the void surged. Something was about to emerge. The pressure peaked all at once. At the center of the battlefield, the Triarchs finally moved. Not with haste, not with fury, but with absolute intent. The void around Abyssal and Razor folded inward, corruption collapsing into a single, expanding mass, a sphere of pitch-black nothingness that swallowed light, sound, and even magic as it grew. The air screamed as gravity bent toward it, stones ripping free from the ground and spiraling upward like debris caught in an invisible storm. Before anyone could react, the sphere pulsed. Not an explosion, a wave. Invisible pressure tore outward like a tidal force, ripping through the battlefield and far beyond it. The ground buckled in concentric rings. Trees bent inward. Buildings groaned as if the planet itself were choking. Farther out, people collapsed mid-step, clutching their heads as sickness overwhelmed them. Some falling lifeless where they stood, others screaming as their bodies twisted, bones cracking and shadows stretching as they rose again as malformed void creatures. Goku cried out as the wave slammed into him, his Super Saiyan 3 aura sputtering violently as nausea ripped through his body. He dropped to one knee, fist digging into the dirt to keep himself upright. This isn't just power, it's poisoning the world. Vegeta staggered but stayed standing, teeth clenched, veins bulging as he forced his ki inward to keep it from tearing loose. Even so, his breath hitched. Damn it. This thing's contaminating everything, living or not. Meliodas planted his sword into the ground, bracing himself as the pressure crawled through him like ice in his veins. This isn't domination, he muttered darkly. It's assimilation. Merlin's breath caught as she felt the wave pass through her barriers, her spells groaning under the strain. They're condensing it, she said sharply. All the excess, all the instability, and venting the overflow into the world. The void sphere pulsed again, harder. Chandler and Cusack were thrown backward violently, ripped free from their positions as if the Triarchs had decided they were no longer worth controlling directly. They slammed into the ground on opposite sides of the battlefield, carving trenches through stone as void energy crawled over them like living chains. For a moment, it looked like they were broken. Then the sphere pulsed again. Cusack convulsed, his body snapping upright unnaturally as void poured into him. Sealing fractures, thickening his frame, his empty eyes burning brighter than before. Chandler followed, his shattered incantations reforming into something denser, darker, spells no longer bound by demonic law, but fueled directly by the sphere's emissions. They rose slowly, stronger, denser, deadlier. They're not being discarded, Gowther said, voice flat but urgent. They're being overcharged. Meliodas took a half-step forward instinctively. Master! Merlin snapped, no. Look at them. Cusack moved first, vanishing and reappearing behind Diane with terrifying speed, his strike detonating against her guard hard enough to send shockwaves through the earth despite her footing. Chandler followed, unleashing a void-infused inferno that didn't burn. It consumed, shredding King's barriers layer by layer and forcing Gowther to intervene directly. They're faster, King gasped, and heavier. Zeldris stared, fists shaking. They're being used as conduits. Esterasa clenched his teeth, eyes burning with fury and grief. They're not masters anymore, he growled. They're extensions. The sphere pulsed again, and the sickness intensified. Void beasts across the battlefield swelled larger, claws elongating, roars deepening as the energy fed them directly. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Even the sins and the remaining commandments felt their strength slipping, magic and ki both costing more with every second. Merlin staggered back a step, eyes wide as her calculations updated faster than she could speak. The fusion's accelerating, she said. They don't need refinement anymore. They need completion. Goku forced himself upright, aura flickering wildly as he stared at the sphere, jaw set. Whatever comes out of that thing, he said quietly, is going to be way stronger than before. Vegeta rolled his shoulders, ki compressing tighter, denser, more dangerous. A grim smirk crossed his face despite the pressure crushing down on him. Good, he said. Then we finish this before it finishes us. The void sphere shuddered violently, and from within it, something began to form. The void sphere collapsed inward with a sound like reality snapping its own spine. For a fraction of a second, There was nothing. No pressure, no gravity, no magic, no key. Even sound ceased to exist, as if the universe had drawn a single, terrified breath. Then it opened. The fused triarch did not step out. It unfolded. Space bent around its form as it emerged. Layers of void peeling back like burned flesh, revealing something denser beneath. Its body was no longer fractured into competing aspects. Abyssial's calculated malice and Razor's ravenous wrath were now synchronized, moving with singular intent. Its presence pressed down harder than gravity, heavier than a scanner's light, colder than death itself. And then it acted, not with a roar, not with a charge. It looked at the battlefield. The air imploded. A horizontal wave of compressed void detonated outward from the Triarch's gaze alone, ripping across the land faster than thought. Diane barely had time to scream before slamming Gideon into the earth, forcing every ounce of her power downward as the wave hit. The ground cratered for miles, shock waves tearing through forests and cities alike as entire sections of terrain collapsed inward. King's barriers shattered on contact. Not broken, erased, his body flung backward as he fought to stay conscious. Gowther was ripped off his feet mid-calculation, sent skidding through stone as his systems overloaded, trying to process something that did not obey logic. Goku crossed his arms instinctively as the wave slammed into him. Super Saiyan 3 roaring violently as he was driven backward through multiple ridgelines, carving a trench through solid rock before crashing to a stop. He coughed, blood splattering against the ground as his aura flickered dangerously. He struggled to rise. That wasn't even an attack. Vegeta fared no better. He dug his boots into the earth, ki compressed to a razor's edge, but the force still hurled him backward, slamming him into a cliffside hard enough to fracture it. He growled through the pain, eyes blazing. So this is the baseline. A scanner did not move. The wave struck him head-on and split. Void pressure sheared away around his body like water crashing against an unbreakable pillar, the ground beneath him pulverizing into dust while he remained standing, unmoved, sunlight blazing defiantly against the encroaching dark. The Triarch's head tilted slightly, attention finally locking onto him. Then it raised one hand. The world tilted. Gravity inverted in a localized collapse centered on Escanor, the earth tearing upward as if trying to swallow him into the sky. Mountains groaned. Stones screamed. Even the sunlit air distorted violently as the Triarch attempted to remove Escanor from reality rather than overpower him. Escanor planted his feet. No, he said calmly. He swung. Not wildly, not hurriedly, just once. The blow detonated like a newborn star, sunlight and void colliding in a blinding eruption that ripped a canyon across the battlefield and sent shockwaves rippling into both worlds. The Triarch slid backward for the first time, carving a path through shattered ground as its form warped under the impact. The silence that followed was suffocating. Merlin stared, horror and awe twisting together. It adapted instantly. The Triarch straightened slowly. Then it answered. Its body pulsed, and a new wave erupted, denser than before, sharper, targeted. Void tendrils tore outward from its form, spearing through the battlefield with surgical precision, impaling terrain, crushing structures, dragging void beasts toward it as fuel. Chandler and Cusack convulsed violently as their power was siphoned further, their bodies screaming under the strain, but growing deadlier by the second. This time, the wave carried intent. It wasn't testing. It wasn't observing. It was beginning of the end. The battlefield did not explode again. It held its breath. Merlin stepped forward, staff raised just enough for the sigils around it to stabilize, her voice cutting through the chaos with unnatural clarity. Everyone stop attacking, she commanded. Now, every second of reckless force feeds it. Vegeta scoffed instinctively, blood streaking his chin. You've got about 5 seconds before it kills us all. That is exactly my point. Merlin snapped back, and for the first time, there was fear beneath her composure. She turned her gaze toward the fused Triarch. the void around it folding and refolding like muscle beneath skin. What stands before us is no longer a creature. It is a junction. Goku blinked, breath still uneven. A what? A convergence entity, Merlin continued. An existence formed when a higher dimensional force fractures its will and later recombines through conflict. Abyssal and Razor were never meant to be separate. Their division was damage. Their fusion is repair. Gauther's eyes glowed brighter. Confirmed. The Triarch is no longer governed by demon law, chaos law, or divine hierarchy. Meliodas tightened his grip on his sword. Then what is it? Merlin didn't hesitate. A living seam between worlds. The words landed heavier than any blow. She gestured upward, where the sky cracked and reknit itself. The void did not invade Britannia or Earth by accident. It was drawn by imbalance, by gods, kings, demons, and warriors tearing reality too often, too violently. The Triarch exists to finish what that imbalance started. Vegeta's eyes narrowed. You're saying it's not here to conquer. No, Merlin said quietly. It's here to simplify, to merge, to erase the need for separation. Goku swallowed. So if we kill it, the worlds collapse into one, Merlin finished. Not harmoniously, not cleanly. Life rewritten under void law. Hawk squeaked from behind Diane. So, we can't kill it, and we can't ignore it? Merlin nodded grimly. Correct. We must break the junction, not the body. She lifted her staff again, the runes shifting, which means three things. It must be destabilized at its core. The worlds must be held apart during the break. And the final strike must come from power that exists outside Britannia's magical law. Her eyes flicked to Goku and Vegeta. And that, she said, is where you come in. She hesitated, just briefly, then continued, voice quieter. The Triarch is not singular by nature. The void fractures itself into governing aspects when it invades reality. Hunger, wrath, erasure, instinct, concepts given form. Gauther tilted his head. You're saying this is not the only one. Merlin nodded once. No, but it is the only one capable of manifesting fully at a time. Her grip tightened around her staff, or so I believed. Before anyone could respond, Escaner exhaled slowly. The sun burned overhead, brilliant, absolute, and for the first time he felt its strain. Not weakness, not yet, but resistance, like pushing against something that pushed back. The light around him flickered almost imperceptibly, a tremor only he noticed. So, Escaner said calmly, almost amused, even the sun meets its match. Merlin turned sharply. Escaner. No need, he replied gently. I feel it. His gaze never left the Triarch. This form was never meant to exist against something that denies time itself. Goku stared. Wait, you mean? The one does not fail, Escaner said with pride. But it ends. His shadow stretched longer than it should have. And that end is closer than I would like. Meliodas stepped closer. How long? Escaner smiled, smaller now, but resolute. Long enough. Vegeta clicked his tongue. You're planning to anchor the worlds. Escaner glanced sideways. You understand quickly for someone so loud. If you hold the junction open, Vegeta continued, it gives us a window. Escaner nodded once. A narrow one. Merlin's expression hardened. If Escaner anchors Britannia, the Triarch will be forced to commit fully elsewhere. Goku clenched his fists. Then we don't waste that window. Escaner laughed softly. Good. I despise wasted sunlight. The fused Triarch moved again. Not with force, but with intent. Void tendrils plunged into the ground. Not to destroy, but to claim, spreading outward like roots. The sky fractured further as gravity shifted unevenly, pockets of space collapsing inward while others stretched unnaturally. Entire sections of land lifted and folded, phasing partially into the void. Void beasts surged stronger, smarter, coordinated now, hurting rather than charging. Goku's eyes widened. It's cutting off escape routes. And isolating targets, Vegeta snarled. Chandler and Cusack moved again. Not recklessly, but tactically, forcing the sins and commandments apart, driving wedges where teamwork had held. Escaner stepped forward, sunlight roaring brighter as he slammed his axe into the ground. No! The land stopped tearing. The Triarch turned fully toward him. Then the pressure peaked all at once. At the center of the battlefield, the void around the Triarch folded inward, corruption collapsing into a single, expanding mass, a sphere of pitch-black nothingness that swallowed light, sound, and even magic as it grew. The air screamed as gravity bent toward it, stones ripping free from the ground and spiraling upward like debris caught in an invisible storm. "They're condensing it," Merlin said sharply. "All the excess, all the instability." Goku squinted as the pull tugged at his aura. "That's not good, is it?" "That's a fusion chamber," Vegeta growled. "They're done watching." The sphere pulsed once hard. A wave rolled outward, invisible but devastating. The ground buckled in concentric rings. Trees bent inward. Buildings groaned as if the planet itself were choking. Farther out, people collapsed mid-step, clutching their heads as sickness overwhelmed them, some falling lifeless, others screaming as their bodies twisted, shadows stretching as they rose again as malformed void creatures. Goku cried out as the wave hit him, dropping to one knee as nausea ripped through his body. "This isn't power. It's poisoning the world." Vegeta staggered but stayed standing. "It's contamination." Meliodas braced himself. "It's assimilation." The sphere pulsed again. Chandler and Cusack were thrown backward violently, ripped free from their positions as if the Triarch had decided they were no longer worth controlling individually. They slammed into the ground on opposite sides of the battlefield, carving trenches through stone as void energy crawled over them like chains. For a moment, it looked like they were broken. Then the sphere pulsed again. Cusack convulsed and snapped upright, void sealing fractures and thickening his frame, his empty eyes burning brighter. Chandler followed, shattered incantations reforming into something denser, darker, spells no longer bound by demonic law, but fueled directly by the sphere's emissions. "They're being overcharged," Gowther said urgently. They rose stronger, heavier, deadlier. The sickness intensified. Void beasts swelled larger, claws elongating, roars deepening as the energy fed them directly. Even the strongest fighters felt their strength slipping, every action costing more than the last. The sphere compressed again and again until it reached a crushing density. Cracks tore through the sky as Britannia and Earth bled into one another. Flashes of foreign landscapes flickering at the edges of reality. Back on Earth, the sky split like broken glass. Cities trembled. People collapsed mid-step, clutching their chests as nausea swept through them. Chi-Chi dropped her knees, gasping. "Goku!" Mr. Satan screamed incoherently, hiding behind a toppled car. "I knew it. Aliens. Demons. I told you all." Far away, Majin Buu tilted his head, confused. "Bad," he muttered. The world shook again. Back in Britannia, the void sphere shuddered violently. Something was no longer forming. It was about to step forward. The sphere split. Not cracked. Opened like a wound deciding it was time to bleed. From within the collapsing void, Abyssial did not emerge alone. He rose at the forefront of the distortion, his form now fully stabilized, void currents flowing around him with deliberate restraint. The hunger that once radiated aimlessly from his presence was gone, replaced by something colder: control. Merlin's breath caught as her runes screamed in protest. "No, he isn't abandoning the fusion," she realized aloud, horror sharpening her voice. "He's anchoring it." Chandler and Cusack were never meant to survive this phase. As if summoned by her words, Chandler and Cusack were wrenched violently back into motion. They lunged at once, not mindlessly, not in rage, but with the hollow precision of weapons finally unleashed. Cusack appeared before Escaner in a blur, his strike detonating against the sunlit aura and forcing Escaner back a half-step for the first time, the ground collapsing beneath his feet. Chandler followed immediately, void fire cascading across the battlefield, forcing Diane and King to retreat as Gowther erected emergency barriers that screamed under the strain. "They're being driven," Diane shouted. "They're not choosing this." Meliodas grit his teeth as he blocked a joint assault, the impact sending him skidding across fractured stone. "They're being burned out," he snapped. "He's using them until there's nothing left." Zeldris stepped forward, sword blazing with dark energy, as he intercepted Cusack mid-strike. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You taught us loyalty. You taught us restraint. Is this what you meant?" Cusack did not answer, but the void around him tightened, reacting to Zeldris' defiance with violent force. Esterasa roared and charged in from the side, smashing into Chandler with reckless fury. "Look at us," he screamed. "We're still here. We're still fighting." His blows landed hard, forcing Chandler back as void fractures rippled across the demon's form. "If you're going to die," Esterasa snarled, "then die as yourselves." For a moment, just a moment, Chandler hesitated. That was all Abyssial needed. He raised his hand again. The world shifted. Britannia's sky peeled back like fabric, revealing Earth's horizon bleeding through. Oceans overlapping forests, cities phasing into ancient plains, gravity lurching as the two realities began to interlock. This was no violent collision. It was a forced alignment, systems knitting together under void law. Goku staggered as his ki surged uncontrollably. "The pressure's gone," he shouted. "My power. It's not fighting the world anymore." Vegeta snarled, instinctively compressing his aura as it threatened to explode outward. He merged the rules, he realized. He's removing the limits by erasing the boundaries. Escanor dug his heels into the ground, sunlight flaring desperately as the merged gravity tried to pull him upward and downward at once. "So," he growled, forcing himself upright, "this is how he intends to finish it." Abyssial's voice rolled across both worlds simultaneously, distorted, layered, impossible to locate. "Separation was the error," he intoned. "Division bred resistance. Completion restores order." Merlin screamed as her staff cracked under the strain. "He's not just merging terrain," she shouted. "He's merging magic, ki, causality itself. If this stabilizes, there is no undoing it." Behind her, Hawk clutched Diane's leg, shaking. "I hate this. I hate this. I hate this cosmic stuff." Back on the battlefield, Monspiet and Dariari moved together without a word, intercepting Chandler as he lashed out again. "We buy time," Monspiet said grimly. "Just like the others did." Dariari nodded once. "Then don't waste it." Their combined assault finally pushed Chandler and Cusack together. Not gently, not cleanly, but violently, void energy spiraling wildly as Abyssial's control tightened. Cusack screamed for the first time as his form destabilized completely, Chandler's incantations collapsing into raw void mass as the two were dragged toward each other against their will. Zeldris reached out instinctively. Wait, too late. The void crushed inward. Chandler and Cusack were forced together, their remaining power compressed brutally, screams cutting off as their forms merged into a single, grotesque mass of void and demonic essence, stronger, denser, and utterly empty. The ground shook as the fused horror landed. Merlin fell to one knee, eyes wide with terror and understanding. "He's using them as the final catalyst," she whispered. "Once that fusion stabilizes, Abyssial won't need anchors anymore." Abyssial spread his arms slowly, void streaming outward as the merged worlds groaned under the strain. High above, in the torn space between realities, two vast presences stirred, no longer restrained by distance, no longer dormant. Esterasa felt it and went still. "There's more," he said quietly. Gowther's eyes burned bright. "Yes, two remaining Triarch aspects have been activated." Goku clenched his fists, power roaring around him as the sky cracked further. "So this really is it," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "Everything at once." Vegeta stepped beside him, aura sharpening like a blade. "Good," he growled. "I was getting tired of warm-ups." Above them all, Abyssial smiled, not in triumph, but anticipation, as the worlds continued to merge and the final fusion drew closer. The smile did not widen. Abyssial did not gloat. That alone terrified Merlin more than anything else she had seen so far. The void around him stabilized, not violently, not explosively, but smoothly, like a machine finishing a long calculation. The overlapping skies of Earth and Britannia shuddered, then locked another fraction closer together, clouds phasing through one another in distorted layers as foreign stars flickered into view and vanished again. Gravity lurched. Goku staggered midair as the rules shifted again, his Super Saiyan 3 aura surging instinctively before tightening back under his control. He felt it clearly now. The resistance was gone, but in its place was something worse. Freedom with a cost. Every spike of power echoed farther than it should have, like the world were listening too closely. Vegeta, Goku said quietly, eyes never leaving Abyssial. I can push harder now. Vegeta felt it too. His ki flared once in sharp irritation before compressing inward, tighter than before, denser, more lethal. Yeah, he growled. Because he wants us to. Escanor planted his axe into the ground as another tremor rolled through the merged land. Sunlight blazing fiercely around him as he forced stability where there should have been none. The one held, but he could feel the strain now, deep in his bones, like the sun itself was being asked to shine in two skies at once. So this is your endgame, Escanor said calmly, voice carrying effortlessly across the battlefield. Not victory, not annihilation. His eyes narrowed. Replacement. Abyssial's gaze finally settled on him fully. Correction, the Triarch replied, voice layered across both worlds, vibrating through stone and cloud alike. Restoration. The fused demon horror behind him, what remained of Chandler and Cusack, shifted, void-wrapped limbs scraping against the ground as it exhaled a sound that was not quite breath, not quite hunger. The air around it curdled, demonic pressure twisted into something colder, more absolute. Zeldris took an involuntary step back, teeth clenched. That thing, Esterasa swallowed hard. It doesn't feel alive. No, Gowther said quietly. It feels finished. Abyssial raised one hand. Not toward Escanor, not toward Goku or Vegeta, toward the sky. The rupture above widened another degree, and far beyond sight, something answered. Merlin's breath hitched as her staff screamed in protest, ancient runes shattering and reforming in rapid succession. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in dawning clarity. He's not fusing yet, she realized aloud. He's aligning. Goku clenched his fists, lightning cracking violently around his SSJ-3 form. Aligning with what? Merlin's voice dropped to a whisper. The others. The void responded. Far above the fractured skies, two immense pressures shifted, not arriving, not manifesting, but turning their attention fully toward the convergence below. The merged worlds groaned like a living thing under unbearable strain as causality itself began to thin. Vegeta's smirk sharpened, dangerous and eager despite the scale of it all. So if I don't stop him now, there won't be a now left, Merlin finished. Escanor straightened, sunlight roaring brighter around him as he tightened his grip on Rita. Then allow me, he said evenly, to remind this thing what it means to be opposed. Goku exhaled slowly, centering himself, power rising, not wildly, but with purpose. Guess this is it, he said, glancing sideways at Vegeta. No holding back. Vegeta cracked his neck, aura sharpening like a blade about to strike. Try to keep up, Kakarot. Behind them, Meliodas stepped forward, eyes burning with resolve, Ban forcing himself upright despite the warped reality grinding against his regeneration. Diane and King bracing themselves around Merlin as Gowther recalculated at impossible speed. The battlefield tightened. The world strained. And for the first time since the void began to move, Abyssial lowered his arm and prepared to finish the convergence.
And that's where we'll end the episode. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and let me know what you think in the comments. Your support helps a new channel like this grow and motivates me to keep writing these adventures.